Hello, my name is Mario, and I'm the individual behind the Buzz Belief debate series that Matt alludes to in his video. I started the series in partnership with Mythicist Milwaukee in hopes of bringing conflicting proponents of belief systems and ideas together to have essentially a barstool debate, albeit with an audience. Sometimes we host these debates within Mythcons, sometimes not. And so far, this has been a really fruitful endeavor, and I've been very happy with it. As someone intimately connected to I want to clarify a few things discussed in the video that Matt made about the now infamous Mythcon event, and I'll address a few other relevant topics along the way. First, Matt is a total intellectual hero of mine. I like him, and I think his impact on the secular cause can't be overstated. So it pains me to even have to go here, but I think I would be doing the ideals that Matt and his contemporaries have fearlessly fought for, and if I didn't point out the problems in what Matt is asserting in this video that he made. And fortunately, there are a number. First, and this is pretty trivial, but it seems to matter to this large group of people, Mythicist Milwaukee is not, as Matt seems to suggest, entirely dedicated to Jesus mythicism. Its focus can be summed up in its slogan, Today's Religions, Tomorrow's Ancient Myths, which speaks to the group's interest in studying and exposing the mythological roots and contents of all religion. I think Matt would agree that the narratives of religion equate to myth. So it's really not that peculiar or narrowly focused, as he says. And while these things are not explicit in its name, most of the group's members, Mythicist Milwaukee's members, would identify as skeptics, atheists, humanists, and they hold an array of political views. So it's not really surprising that these things would inform the curation of the group's conferences. If you look back at past speakers and topics from previous Mythcons, you'll see that the whole Jesus mythicism thing is only a part of the group's focus. And this is a small point, but it seems to be puzzling to some people, Matt included, even though for him it really shouldn't be, because this was discussed during a pre-debate conference call when Azra Namani asked this question about MM's focus, and one of the group's leaders basically explained it at length. So I was not involved in picking the speakers outside of the Buzz Belief segment, but I do understand, I think, why invited who they did, and it wasn't just the cold opportunism that seems to be at the heart of Matt's criticism of And it certainly wasn't racism or misogyny or rape apology, the nonsense that's been asserted by the vocal few that Matt rightly takes to task in his video. So as to the motivations, first, many of the people who attend atheism conferences are tired of seeing the same faces discussing the same topics in an echo chamber, and it's showing in dropping attendance numbers. The organizers of I think, are right, not only in the interest of self-preservation, but in attempting to breathe life into a stale movement, in looking to younger and more popular voices representing relative issues to speak at their conference. That said, I think Armored Skeptic was a perfect conclusion. Sargon and Shu maybe topically a little less so, but let's face it, geo and social politics are acutely affecting the cohesion not only of the social order of the world, but of the atheism movement specifically. I think their inclusion was warranted, especially because their perspective has been heavily underrepresented in secular-based events, despite having a sizable chunk of the community that sympathizes with their concerns. Excuse me. A very strong contingent of social justice advocates came to totally dominate the conversation within most facets of the secular community. And this led to absurd conduct policies governing events, false claims about widespread oppression and assault within the movement, and even attempts to codify a melding of disbelief in God with a political ideology that would then be used to kind of morally oversee the community. I mean, let's be honest, wasn't that really what this atheism plus stuff was? In a movement comprised of so many different kinds of personalities, backgrounds, belief structures, etc., I think a decided backlash to this ideological dominance was predictable, if not inevitable. I don't see the problem in allowing voices who affect hundreds of thousands of minds within our community and without a chance to come out from behind the barrier of social media and subject themselves to the marketplace of ideas. I am a staunch advocate of debate and free speech, and that's kind of the point of why I founded Buzz Belief and continued a partnership with MM. The leadership of MM has given me no cause to think that they don't share these same values about free speech. There were definitely problems, mostly with the execution that came with the Sargon Smith interview or whatever that was. There should have absolutely been a moderator to keep that conversation on track. Even without, there were points of agreement, and I have to wonder what might have actually been achieved had that exchange been a little bit governed. But this small part of the conference seems to define Mythcon for so many people, which is so weird, and this includes Matt, and it's unfortunate as well. This was true before the event, and it's true now. Most of the noise that came from the people trying to stop Mythcon at all costs were most upset about Sargon, despite the fact that he was to be directly countered on stage by someone representing opposing views, and that person would be have a superior position. He would be the interviewer and Sargon the interviewee. What if instead of lying to the owners of the venue and harassing speakers and guests and organizers, that those who engaged in this behavior actually just stood up for their beliefs in good faith, civilly and respectfully? They might have gotten somewhere. Matt mentioned some people who were invited to attend but chose to pull out of the event, and a little more on that later, but he describes his own decision to attend by saying, quote, I was going to talk with the individuals, make up my own mind, not just rely on the comments prior to the event, then, if necessary, report on it afterwards. But this just isn't true, because Matt told me the night before the conference, after being in Milwaukee for less than an hour, that he was going to be making a video announcing that he would not be returning to Mythcon until there was a change in leadership and direction. Okay. It seems necessity precedes warrant, as the majority of the reasons Matt goes on to describe being dissatisfied by happened after his decision to make a video deriding the conference and its organizers. So, how does Matt usually respond to people who make up their mind before they have adequate evidence? We've all seen it. It's just post hoc justification for belief. Due to the fact that I was hosting a party and had a ton to attend to, I wasn't able to really drill down into what was driving Matt's dissatisfaction. But my gut then, and even more so now, is that he has a problem personally with a couple of MM's leaders, and that he had indeed believed, to some extent at least, the comments that he mentions having received about the event. And he was coming to Milwaukee to connect the dots, to draw a picture of Mythcon that he had already developed. So I knew in advance that Matt was going to be looking for things to justify what he'd already decided to do. Now, due to their interactions at the American Atheist Convention, and maybe those preceding, Matt seemingly has come to the conclusion that MM's leaders are unethically driven by popularity and success. But I think he stretches the truth a bit to paint them in this way. Like he says in his video, referring to a conference call between that happened amongst me and him and 3 MM members, Faisal and Azra, when we were planning the Buzz Belief debate. Quote, they had a real need to sell this thing. They just needed to get Trump into the topic because getting Trump would gain extra attention. This is how he characterized the MM guys. First, even if this was how the conversation went, my response would be, yeah, and so what? We're not throwing these debates for our health. We want people to attend, and we want people outside of our ideological peer groups to attend. So a provocative debate topic is essential. But this is not how the conversation went. In fact, ironically, Matt was the one to suggest that we could, quote, have a sensationalist title that addresses the topic vaguely. We were looking for areas of disagreement between Faisal and Azra, and Azra was the first to suggest putting Trump in the title, as she had supported Trump for reasons I will never understand, and Faisal was opposed. The guys then proceeded for nearly 30 minutes to offer topics without Trump in the title, like how's the West surrendered to Islam? Is the West responsible for extremism? These types of things. But so after going around and around in circles, it was actually me who returned to Azra's suggestion and offered the title Islam in the Age of Trump. Everybody was cool with it, including Matt. And we all thought it encapsulated the difference between the debaters, but offered enough leeway to keep the conversation fluid and broad. So Matt's characterization of this call is just plainly fallacious, and I think purposefully slanderous. Matt also criticizes for inviting special guests and using them on the billing to help attract attendees to the premiere of their film, Batman and Jesus, which, far from the nefarious grubbing behavior suggested, is actually a fairly vanilla and commonplace practice, used by pretty much everyone premiering a film anywhere. He cites himself, Ron Miscavige, Seth Andrews, Aaron Ra, Richard Carrier, and David Fitzgerald. He then says, none of these people were speaking or participating in the conference, and that a number of them felt weird about lending their name to promote ticket sales. The first part is plainly false because he himself and Ron Miscavige were active participants of the conference. And Aaron, Carrier, and Fitzgerald are prominent in the film. Aaron Ra is the only one who dropped out citing concerns of his name being used. But that wasn't because it was promoting the film. I think he had a problem with some of the speakers. Seth dropped out for other fallacious, and I'll get to that later, reasons, and the rest of the VIPs attended, and I think I can say happily. Referring to MM's decision to invite the popular YouTubers, Matt mockingly says, oh, they wanted to be cool and edgy. Let's give people what they want. Let's give them controversy. And again, I just kind of have to respond, yeah, and so what? If it wasn't for controversy, I don't think we would know who Matt Dillahunty is. I mean, what is the atheist experience if not controversial? So I think it's plain that Matt is not a fan of MM's leaders and will abandon the values he often touts to portray them negatively and bolster his thesis that they are out for success at all costs. I mean, before even hearing a word from any of the speakers that he knew nothing about, aside from what he'd been told, he had decided to release a video announcing his not returning to Mythcon until different leadership and direction and whatnot. But let's go through some of the reasons that Matt cites in the video as driving his decision. The big, if not only ones, seem to have to do with Sargon. After all, he says he had no problem with Armored Skeptic and Shoe on Head. And he talks about a conversation that he had the night before with Sargon at a party where the infamous "I wouldn't even rape you" tweet was discussed towards the end of what sounded like what had been a pretty good conversation up until then. I didn't hear the exchange, and maybe Sargon's arguments defending the tweets were not convincing and circular and awful and all those things. But I think Matt, again, claims something that is false. But first, a little context. For those of you who don't know, Sargon, and I can't imagine anyone watching this video wouldn't know by now, but he tweeted that statement to a female British member of Parliament who had a track record of saying and doing horrible things, reprehensible things in the name of feminism. This woman had laughed at a male MP for even suggesting a discussion on men's-related issues such as the high rates of suicide and cancer and violent crime victimization prevalent in male populations. This MP, a woman named Jess Phillips, actually equated the mass rape that happened in Cologne, Germany, where some 1,200 women were legitimately assaulted in the course of a few hours, to an average night out in Birmingham, England, which is fucking absurd and encapsulates a common alarmist rhetoric that is motivating people like Shu and Sargon and Armored to push back. Phillips said of the leader of her own party, quote, "I won't knife you in the back, I'll knife you in the front." And she was also misusing science and claiming, despite a lack of evidence, that she was constantly being sexually threatened online. And she was doing these things basically to help pass legislation that would give the government greater control to police speech online. The evidence that she did provide of harassment was of a few people in some chat room joking amongst themselves about hypothetical scenarios in which her perceived male bashing is met with her being summarily raped. Totally disgusting, to be sure, and Sargon even called it vile, but hardly a threat and obviously meant sarcastically. It seems what Sargon was trying to do was to show that no matter what, Phillips and her followers would spin anything, pretty much anything, into a threat for political gain, even if it's an obvious non-threat, like "I wouldn't even rape you." Phillips, who claims she was once egregiously groped in a bar, which is horrible, when she was a teenager, is held up now by many as a rape survivor and is given considerable deference because of this. But, given her extreme positions and past no-holds-barred behaviors, she even told another female MP once to fuck off for challenging her. This is hardly a powerless casualty of bullying. And as she said herself, that Sargon's tweet didn't bother her. So British politics is much more rough and tumble than American politics. And like with everything, context matters. And that said, I don't like the tweet, and I wouldn't have done it myself, frankly. But I understand some of the larger situational relevance, which seems to be lost on a lot of people, including Matt, who claims that Sargon didn't actually engage with the actual ideas being proposed by this MP, but instead engaged in what's essentially juvenile name-calling. The problem is, Sargon made an hour-long video dissecting this woman's politics, which I would say is engaging with the ideas. Matt also claims that Sargon admitted that the inclusion of the word "even" brought the meaning of that tweet into the realm of "you're so ugly I wouldn't even screw you," which I find totally hard to believe, since Sargon has repeatedly refuted that meaning in the past with tweets like, "No, that's not what I mean. It's that rape is wrong," and "Of course it has nothing to do with how she looks. I wouldn't do it even if she was a finished swimsuit model." So it seems that Matt may have not only mischaracterized and misunderstood the meaning of the tweet, but of the audience response to it the next day when it was brought up by Smith. Matt in his video characterized the cheering that followed as if it was for the content of the tweet itself. But that's not the impression I got at all. Though I admit much of the audience's behavior seemed sycophantic and jeering and not really in good faith to the spirit of healthy dialogue. Though Smith's attitude and attacking of the crowd made it worse and I think more defensible. What I saw it was as his fans expressing support that Sargon wasn't going to be cowed by Smith's attempt to use his moral outrage as rhetorical leverage or evidence of Sargon's awful character. The fact that the crowd was so heavily skewed in Sargon's favor was unfortunate to some extent, but a symptom of a larger issue prevalent amongst those with further left-leaning proclivities, let's say. And I can't say to what extent the disparity was causally related, but I think the reaction of people like Seth Andrews, who chose not to attend in protest of Sargon, shows why the conversation was so hopelessly one-sided. And again, it pains me to bash a hero, but Seth cited an obviously doctored video made by an enemy of Sargon's that takes Sargon's words out of context to paint him as a monster as his reason for pulling out of Mythcon. Really? I mean, how many others followed Seth, who has a large following, into this fallacious position, a position that to me seems faith-based, to be honest? even offered Seth a 20-minute speaking slot to say whatever he wanted at the convention. Seth didn't accept, which makes me wonder about the veracity of his intellectual objections to the conference. And how does this not show that was acting in good faith to their stated objective of promoting dialogue? And how does this not at least partially show that those who so object to the criticism of social justice are not interested in dialogue at all? Then there are people like this Steve Shives, who I was not familiar with before, and I really wish I wasn't now. I mean, really, is this guy playing like a character? He's like a screechy pull string doll that can't stop spewing ist labels at people. This guy and his unmarried band of cohorts did everything they could to make sure people on their side didn't attend the conference. And now they bemoan how one-sided the crowd was. Well, go fucking figure. I applaud Matt for showing up. Even if it was a sort of like pre-strike recon mission, he was under a lot of pressure not to go, and he did an awesome job as the moderator, as anybody would expect. The guy's a pro. But I wish he wouldn't have left the theater literally 8 minutes into the segment he is so angry about, and instead stayed, gathered info, and used the Q&A as an opportunity to push back on what he thought was unreasonable or unethical in the exchange. This is the only way forward. May the best ideas win. The costs are just too high otherwise. Retreating from speech that's hurting your ears or feelings or sensibilities is leaving that speech unchecked. If you have a problem with something, challenge it. Matt is one of the best in the game. And the opportunity was there. And as long as I have a say, that opportunity will always be there. I want debate to be robust, provocative, relevant, and multifaceted. When people who oppose the ideas espoused by Sargon or Skeptic or Shuan Head or Melissa Chen, Azra, Faisal remove themselves from the conversation, they're essentially allowing these ideas to be delivered unchallenged. And this just creates another echo chamber and halts the conversation. And unfortunately, this type of "they're so mean, so I'm not playing" tactic seems to only be coming from one side. And every time it happens, it confirms the other side's contention of the weakness and flimsy ideology inherent in their opponents and their positions. I mean, there were a lot of Christians who showed up to the conference. At least it seemed like a lot. They didn't run away from a gathering that was obviously comprised of people who mock and disparage their belief system. Social justice warriors could learn a thing or two from the people who were there with Bible in hand or Make America Great hat on their heads, lining up for the Q&As. This is what I have been adamant about wanting to create in this endeavor. But instead of engaging in the larger conversation, you get tantrum throwing and incessant shouting across a gulf of static. Now, I was out of the country for a long stretch preceding the debates and the conference. And I didn't really understand the extent to which the outrage machine was fired up and was making noise and causing problems. And I can't fucking believe the extent to which some people went to stop words from being spoken on a stage. I had no idea who Sargon or Shuan Head was before MM booked them. But in light of the hysteria surrounding their inclusion, I thought I'd best familiarize myself with their work. There was no way I could watch everything these people have put out. They're super prolific, but after a robust scan of their work, I found them to be totally not guilty of these hyperbolic charges being leveled at them from their opponents. And I think they were totally valid inclusions in the conference. But what I do have a problem with from all sides is the lack of nuance in people's positions now. I'm also a bit alarmed by some of the people that seem to latch onto some of the personalities, as you can clearly see demonstrated on comment threads under their videos. They seem to be these same snickering trolls who, for lack of arguments, trade in crass and vile exchanges online. These are the types that helped turn the joke that was Donald Trump as president into a fucking nightmare that we can't wake up from. These people half hear what someone like Sargon says, then fill in the rest with their ignorance and their arrogant delusion that they're part of the inside joke that really gets it about how the world really operates. In reality, a lot of these people are just ill-informed jackasses. But guess what? The reaction of those who attack the event with absurd accusations and the slanderous and truly harassing methodologies that Matt is right to equate to the tactics used by terrorist groups, etc., have only helped to fuel and entrench those that seem that they seem so frazzled about. I mean, what in the world is this? Again, it pains me to have to confront Matt in this way, but I think he's being unreasonable, fallacious, and worst of all, dishonest. I mean, really, to paint an all-day conference so broadly and emotionally because of 8 minutes of a bad exchange is not reasonable. Matt says, quote, "I share the stage with people I vehemently disagree with on a regular basis." But he couldn't sit in a chair for 8 minutes to gather information and then stand up to it in a Q&A? I mean, what about the conference warrants his lame joke that we should call it misinformation rather than myth-information? Did he not see Melissa Chen's awesome, amazing talk? He obviously missed Ron Miscavige because he seemed to not even know he was involved in the conference. What about the entirely civil and fascinating exchange between Faisal and Azra that he moderated? He also says he had little problem and agreed with much of what Armored and Shu said. So again, my suspicion is that this is totally personal. He had decided he was going to snipe the events in a video before it even happened, and it seems he was looking for ammunition to use at the conference. He found 8 minutes. Before I go, I just want to address Aaron Ra for a moment, as while I'm admonishing the unholy trinity as Matt, Aaron, and Seth have referred to themselves in the past. Might as well get to all of them, because they're all acting as if they have collectively stroked out or something and forgotten what they're about. Aaron wrote in a recent message on Facebook, he made some truly bizarre and wholly unfounded claims. He said, quote, "Your sponsors and some of your speakers have already revealed that they don't want people like me or Matt Dillahunty to speak at any more atheist conferences. That's why neither Matt nor Seth Andrews were invited to speak at the Second Reason rally, even though they hadn't spoken at the first one either. That's the Atheist Experience TV show and the Thinking Atheist radio podcast." Well, that's some tinfoil hat shit right there. As the only sponsor of the event, it's just absurd. I admire all three of these guys to an extent to which they'll never know and want them to succeed. I would gladly help any one of them in any way I can. Besides, we're not some shadowy cabal of shot callers who influence things in the way suggested. He goes on, saying, quote, "I am scheduled for one last atheist conference, the Global Atheist Convention in Melbourne, Australia. Sadly, even that will suffer because of the damage caused by your convention. So I'm doing my best to move on to science advocacy videos, since you all have effectively killed what was left of the atheism movement. Holy shit. I hope we didn't kill the atheism movement. That was certainly not the intent at all. We were truly trying to just spark civil dialogue. Aaron also claimed on Facebook with a fallacious video evidence that was later debunked by the person who made the video, that he knew that Mythcon was specifically designed to be divisive. No, it wasn't. So I hated making this fucking video, but I'm truly confused by the reaction of people to this event. And I can only repeat what I've already said. If you don't like the ideas someone's putting forth, don't run away. Don't act dishonestly and slanderously. Challenge them. At any event that I'm a part of hosting, you'll always have that opportunity. But do it civilly and honestly, because you're not doing yourself or your cause any favors when you respond in any other way. Especially when it's with threats and lies and harassment. We will think carefully about our next events, and we hope to see you there.